My name is Lauren Bennett. I am 32 years old. I was sitting at the small desk in my home office, the one I had turned into a workspace for my event planning business, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the family group chat. The message thread had been quiet all morning, just the usual back and forth about who was bringing what for Memorial Day. Then my stepmother posted a short note that the planning group chat had been updated and that some voices were being left out this year to keep things running smoothly. My father replied right beneath it. His words sat there for everyone to read. Lauren has enough going on with her little business. We don't need her input this year. It's better this way for the whole family. I read the message twice, then a third time, feeling the words settle heavy in my chest. I had organized every family gathering for the past 6 years. I remembered who liked which dishes, who needed extra chairs, who always forgot their own birthday. Now my father had announced to aunts, uncles, and cousins that my voice was being removed on purpose. The notification had exposed it in the most public way possible, and I could already picture the quiet conversations that would follow among the relatives who saw it. I picked up the phone and called Amanda Torres, my business partner, and the only person outside the family I trusted with the raw parts of my life. She answered on the first ring, her voice steady and kind the way it always was when work got complicated. "Lauren, you okay? You never call in the middle of the day unless something's wrong." I told her about the group chat, how my father had written those words where everyone could see them, how it felt like he was deliberately cutting me out of something that used to be mine. Amanda stayed quiet while I talked, then said softly, "This isn't just about a barbecue anymore, is it? If family starts repeating that you're too busy or too much, it could touch your clients. Some of them know your relatives." The thought had already crossed my mind, but hearing her say it out loud made it real. I had built this business slowly after leaving a job that asked too much and gave too little back. I had stayed up late writing proposals and driven across the valley to meet with couples who wanted their weddings to feel like home. Now the same family I had tried to hold together was becoming the reason some of those clients might hesitate. I thanked Amanda and promised to finish the current proposal by the end of the week. When the call ended, the house felt too quiet. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water I didn't really want. My father had never been the loud, affectionate type, but he had been steady when I was growing up. After my mother died during my last year of college, he had been the one I called when things felt too heavy. Then he married my stepmother, and the steadiness changed. She was polite in person, always offering coffee or asking about my week, but there was a careful distance in how she spoke about the family, as if I were standing just outside the circle. I had kept trying anyway. I sent birthday cards, offered to help when their roof needed work, included them in the small milestones of my business. Each time I gave a little more, hoping it would close the gap. The phone rang again. This time it was my father. I answered and kept my voice even, the way I had learned to do when I needed to protect the parts of me that still wanted his approval. "Dad, I saw what you wrote in the group chat." There was a short pause, then his voice came through calm and final. "Lauren, you need to stop making everything about your feelings. Diane and I decided the planning would be simpler without your input this year. You have your business to focus on. The family doesn't need the extra tension." The words landed exactly where he had aimed them. I felt the old familiar sting of being told I was too much, too sensitive, too present. "I've always helped because I wanted to," I said, and the sentence came out quieter than I meant it to. "I thought that was what family did." He sighed, the sound carrying the weight of someone who had already decided the conversation was over. "You take things too personally. This is about keeping things simple. Diane has good ideas, and we're going in a different direction. Just enjoy the day when it comes. Don't turn it into something bigger than it is." He ended the call before I could answer. I stood in the kitchen holding the phone, the screen gone dark, and felt the first real crack in the picture I had kept of my father. He had chosen his words carefully. He had made sure the rest of the family saw me as the problem that needed managing. The next 3 days moved in a strange, suspended way. I finished the client proposal with Amanda's help and sent it off, but my mind kept drifting back to the group chat and the phone call. I noticed small things I had tried to ignore before. A cousin who used to text me for advice about her own small business stopped replying as quickly. An aunt who had asked me to help with her anniversary party last year suddenly said she had it covered. Each silence felt like another relative being turned one by the quiet authority my father carried and the way my stepmother stood beside him. I kept showing up for work because the business was mine, something I had built without asking anyone's permission. But the hurt stayed soft and steady underneath every email and every meeting. On the morning of Memorial Day, I put on a simple cotton sundress and drove the short distance to the community park where the family always gathered. The sun was already high, and the air carried that dry Arizona heat that made everything feel sharper. Tables were being set up, grills were being lit, and children were running across the grass. My father stood near the main table with my stepmother beside him. When he saw me walking toward them with the extra folding chairs I had brought out of habit, his expression stayed neutral. My stepmother gave a small, polite smile that did not reach her eyes. "Lauren," my father said when I reached them, "you didn't have to bring those. We have enough." I set the chairs down anyway and tried to keep my voice light. "I know, but I thought they might still be useful." He nodded once the gesture short and final. "We've got it handled. You can just relax today." The words were not loud, but they carried the same dismissal that had been in the group chat. Several relatives nearby glanced over, and I felt the weight of their quiet attention. I found a spot at the edge of the gathering near a shaded table and watched my father and stepmother move through the crowd together. They laughed with the people I used to organize these days for. I helped where I could, refilling drinks and moving chairs, but every conversation felt like it stopped just short of real warmth. Later, when the food was out and most people were seated, my father motioned for me to follow him a little distance from the main group near a row of picnic tables that gave us a small pocket of privacy. The conversation that followed was quiet, but it carried the same edge as every message and every phone call before it. "Lauren, I need you to hear this clearly," he said, his voice low and steady. "Your stepmother has put a lot of thought into how these gatherings should feel. She needs the family to support that without extra voices pulling in different directions. You showing up and trying to fix everything every time just makes it harder for her. It's time for you to step back." I stood there with the sun warm on my shoulders and the sound of the family behind us, and I felt the full weight of what he was asking. He was not yelling, he was not dramatic. He was simply telling me that my place in the family had been decided without me and that my continued presence was the problem. I wanted to remind him of the years I had shown up, the nights I had stayed late to make sure everything was ready, the way I had tried to include my stepmother, even when it felt like she was already pulling him further away. Instead, I heard myself say very softly, "I understand what you're saying, Dad." The words tasted like surrender, but they also carried something else, something quieter and harder, that I was only just beginning to recognize. I stayed for the rest of the afternoon because leaving would have given him the exact reaction he seemed to expect. I smiled when I needed to, helped clean up when it was time, and drove home with the windows down, the dry air rushing in. That night, I sat on my back patio with a glass of water and let the day settle. The group chat notification had started it all, exposing in one public moment what had been happening slowly for years. My father had removed my voice from the family and then told me to accept it. I did not know what the days after the reunion would bring or how many more relatives would be turned before it was over, but I knew the quiet strength I had been carrying was no longer willing to stay silent forever. The morning after the gathering, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, scrolling through my business email on my laptop. One message stood out immediately. It was from a couple I had been working with for months on their anniversary celebration, a local family who knew several of my relatives. They wrote that they had decided to go in a different direction after speaking with some people close to the family. The wording was polite, almost apologetic, but the meaning was clear. Someone had told them I was difficult to work with, too emotional, the kind of person who turns small disagreements into big dramas. I stared at the screen, my stomach tightening. This was the first concrete consequence, and it had my father's fingerprints all over it. I called Amanda right away. She answered with her usual steady warmth, but I could hear the concern in her voice when I told her about the cancellation. They didn't say it outright. I said my words coming slower than usual, but it was obvious they had heard things. Things that sound exactly like what my father wrote in that group chat. Amanda was quiet for a moment, then asked gently, "Are you going to talk to him about it?" I didn't have an answer yet. Part of me still wanted to believe that if I just explained how much this hurt, he would see it. The other part, the quieter, harder part that had been growing since the phone call at the park, already knew he would dismiss it the same way he always did. Later that afternoon, I reached out to one of my cousins who had been avoiding my texts since the holiday. She answered after several rings, her voice careful and distant. When I asked if everything was all right between us, she said she had just been busy, but there was a pause that told me more than her words. "I heard some things from your dad and Diane," she finally admitted. "They said you were having a hard time and that it was better not to involve you in family stuff right now." I didn't want to make it worse. The betrayal landed softly but completely. Another relative had been turned not with shouting or obvious cruelty, but with the steady, quiet authority my father carried and the way my stepmother stood beside him nodding along. I thanked her for being honest and ended the call before she could hear the shake in my voice. That evening, my father called again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I answered because some small, stubborn part of me still hoped for a different outcome. His tone was the same as before, calm and final, like he was stating facts that could not be argued. "Lauren, Diane, and I heard you were upset at the park. I told you to step back and let us handle things. Stirring up drama with the rest of the family isn't going to change anything. You need to accept that this is how it is now." I felt the old pattern closing in again, the one where my feelings were labeled drama and his decisions were labeled necessary. "Data client canceled today because of what they heard from family," I said, keeping my voice as even as I could. "This isn't just about feelings anymore. It's affecting my work." He sighed again, the sound heavy with the same impatience. "Then maybe it's time you focused on your business and stopped expecting the family to revolve around you. Diane and I are trying to keep things peaceful. Don't make it harder than it has to be." I hung up feeling smaller than I had in years, but also clearer. The turning of relatives was no longer slow or subtle. It was happening in real time, and my father was the one directing it. My stepmother didn't have to say much. Her presence beside him was enough to make his words feel like the family consensus. I spent the next 2 days trying to steady myself. I met with Amanda in person at a quiet cafe near my neighborhood, and we went over every upcoming client to see who might be at risk. She offered to handle some of the follow-up calls so I wouldn't have to hear the hesitation in people's voices. I accepted because I needed the help, but the acceptance tasted like another small loss of control. On the third morning after the holiday, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Cousin Helen, a distant relative on my father's side who lived out of state and rarely came to Arizona. I had met her only a handful of times when I was much younger. Her voice was warm but serious. "Lauren, I'm in town for a few days visiting an old friend. I heard about what happened at the gathering, and I think we should talk. There's something you need to see." She asked if I could meet her at a small park near my neighborhood that afternoon. I almost said no because the last thing I wanted was more family conversation that would leave me feeling exposed. But something in her tone made me agree. I needed to know what she had. We met on a bench under a mesquite tree, the afternoon heat pressing down around us. Helen was older than I remembered, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were kind in a way that made the tightness in my chest ease just a little. She didn't waste time with small talk. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small faded envelope. Inside was an old photograph, the kind taken with a film camera years ago. It showed me as a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, standing beside my mother in our old backyard. My mother's arm was around my shoulders, and we were both laughing at something off camera. On the back in my mother's handwriting were a few lines I'd never seen before. The note read, "Make sure Lauren always has a voice in this family. She carries more strength than she knows." Don't let anyone take that from her, especially when she's trying to find her own way. Helen watched my face as I read it. Your mother gave this to me a few months before she passed, she said quietly. She was worried even then that your father would try to quiet the parts of you that didn't fit what he wanted the family to look like. She asked me to keep it safe and give it to you when the time felt right. I think that time is now. I held the photograph in both hands, the paper soft from years of being stored away. The words on the back felt like they had been written directly to the woman I was today, the one who had spent years giving and still being told she was too much. My mother had seen it coming. She had tried to protect my voice even when she knew she wouldn't be there to do it herself. Helen sat beside me without rushing me, letting the quiet stretch between us. When I finally looked up, my eyes were wet, but my voice was steady. He's been doing this for years, hasn't he? Removing me a little at a time, making sure everyone else sees me the way he wants them to see me? Helen nodded once. Your mother saw the pattern even when you were small. She didn't want you to spend your life proving you deserved a place that should have been yours by right. We sat there a while longer, the photograph resting in my lap. Helen told me she would be staying in town a few more days if I needed to talk again. She didn't push for anything else, and I was grateful for that. When we said goodbye, I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat beside me. The weight of what I now knew settled alongside the weight of everything that was still happening. My father had not just dismissed me at the reunion or in the group chat. He had been shaping the family's view of me for a long time, and my stepmother had helped make that shaping feel natural and necessary. The client who canceled the cousin who pulled away the quiet demand that I step back, none of it was new. It was only the latest part of something older and more deliberate. That night I sat on my back patio again, the same spot where I had sat after the gathering. The photograph and the note were on the table in front of me. I read my mother's words once more, letting them sink in. They didn't erase the hurt or the damage that was still unfolding with my clients and the rest of the family, but they gave the hurt a different shape. It was no longer just about one barbecue or one group chat. It was about a pattern that had been allowed to grow because I had kept giving, kept hoping, kept believing that if I was warm enough and patient enough, my father would eventually see me clearly. My phone lit up with another message from the family group chat. This time it was my father again posting that the family was moving forward with some changes to how gatherings would be handled going forward and that everyone should respect the new approach. He didn't name me, but the message landed exactly where it was meant to. I stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone face down beside the photograph. The choice that had been building inside me was no longer something distant. It was sitting right there on the table with my mother's handwriting and the quiet strength she had tried to leave me. I didn't know yet what I would do with it, but I knew I could not keep pretending that giving more of myself would ever be enough. My name is Lauren Bennett. I am 32 years old. The photograph and my mother's note stayed on my kitchen table for 2 days. Every time I walked past them, I felt the same quiet pull between the comfort of what I had always known and the sharper truth I could no longer ignore. On the third morning, I sent my father a simple text asking if we could talk, just the two of us. He replied that Diane would be there too because we handle family matters together now. I agreed. I needed to say what I had to say with both of them present. We met at their house late in the afternoon when the worst of the heat had passed. I brought the envelope with me. My father sat in his usual chair by the window. My stepmother sat beside him on the small sofa, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The room felt smaller than I remembered. I placed the photograph and the note on the coffee table between us and told them where it had come from. I read my mother's words out loud, letting each sentence sit in the air. When I finished, I looked at my father and said the thing I had been carrying since the group chat notification first appeared. You have been removing my voice from this family for years, not just at the reunion or in that chat, but long before that. You let people believe I am too much, too dramatic, too unreliable, and then you act surprised when it affects my work and the few relationships I still have left here. I kept giving because I thought that was what daughters were supposed to do. I see now that giving more only made it easier for you to decide I didn't belong. My father's face did not change much. He glanced at the photograph but did not pick it up. Lauren, you are turning one old note into a story that explains every disagreement we have ever had. Your mother was sick for a long time. She was emotional about a lot of things. Diane and I have been trying to keep this family steady. You make that harder every time you show up expecting everyone to rearrange themselves around your feelings. My stepmother nodded once the movement small and practiced. We are not trying to hurt you, she added, her voice soft and reasonable. We are trying to protect the peace that some of us actually need. The words landed exactly as I had known they would. He had taken my mother's illness and used it to dismiss her warning. He had taken my attempts to stay connected and called them drama. He had turned relatives one by one with quiet suggestions and then acted as though the distance was my fault. I felt the old familiar ache rise in my chest, the one that had always made me back down and apologize for wanting more than what he was willing to give. This time the ache did not win. I am not asking you to rearrange anything, I said. My voice stayed soft, but it did not shake. I am telling you that I will no longer arrange my life around the version of me you have created for everyone else. I will not keep showing up to be managed. I will not keep offering help that gets used to prove I am the problem when I finally ask for basic respect. If that means the family looks different from the outside, then that is the price of the peace you say you want. My father leaned forward slightly. For the first time in the conversation, his voice carried an edge. You are threatening to walk away from your own family because you did not get your way about one barbecue. That is exactly the kind of reaction that makes people careful around you. Diane and I are not going to beg you to stay involved. If you want to punish us by disappearing, that is your choice. My stepmother placed a hand on his arm, the gesture protective and final. She did not look at me when she spoke. Some people need distance to grow up. Maybe this is what you need. I stood up and picked up the envelope. The photograph went back inside. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply told them I would be limiting contact for a while, possibly a long while, and that any future conversations would have to happen on terms that did not require me to accept being erased. My father did not stand. My stepmother stayed seated beside him. Neither of them asked me to reconsider. The door closed behind me with a quiet click that felt louder than any argument we had ever had. In the weeks that followed, the consequences arrived exactly as I had feared and exactly as I had chosen. 2 more clients who knew relatives pulled their events. A cousin I had once been close to sent a message saying she thought it was better if we did not talk for a while because things were complicated with your dad. The public image of our family stayed intact for everyone else. My father and stepmother continued to host gatherings. Relatives still texted them first. The story that circulated was the one they had shaped for years. Lauren had always been difficult, and now she had chosen to step away. What change was inside me? I stopped waiting for my father to see me clearly. I stopped offering pieces of myself in the hope that one day the offering would be enough. Amanda and I took on 2 new clients who had no connection to my family, and we built the proposals together without me checking my phone every hour for messages that never came. I started sleeping through the night again. The quiet that had once felt like loneliness began to feel like room. I did not have the family I had spent my whole life trying to preserve, but I had something I had never given myself permission to claim the right to stop performing for people who had already decided my role. My father called once more 3 weeks after our conversation. He said the family was planning a small gathering for my stepmother's birthday and that it would look strange if I was not there. I told him I would not be coming. He asked if I was really willing to let one disagreement destroy everything. I answered that the disagreement had never been one thing. It had been the slow, steady removal of my place in the family, and I was no longer willing to pretend otherwise. He hung up without saying goodbye. I did not call back. The photograph and the note now sit in a small frame on the shelf in my office. I do not look at them every day, but I know they are there. They remind me that my mother saw the pattern long before I had the language for it. They also remind me that the strength she wrote about was never something I had to earn by giving more than I had left. It was something I was allowed to use to protect myself. I still feel the loss on certain days, especially when I drive past the community park or see a family text thread I am no longer part of. The grief is real. It does not erase the clarity I found. My father remains the center of the family story he prefers. My stepmother remains beside him. The relatives who are turned continue to see me through the lens he gave them. That is the life they chose. I chose a different one. I am still building my business with Amanda. We are careful now about who we take on as clients, and we talk openly about the cost of staying small to keep other people comfortable. I do not chase invitations anymore. I do not explain my absence. When people ask how my family is doing, I answer that we are finding our own ways. The answer is true enough. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to choose between keeping a painful peace and protecting the voice you were told to quiet, I hope you know you are not the difficult one for finally speaking. Drop peace if you chose yourself.